Jai Hind, Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 9th of October 2020. Now, in this video, we'll be discussing the following topics about the TRP. So, TRPs are in the news for the wrong reasons, so we'll not get into the sensational part. We'll just discuss what are TRPs, how are they calculated, how they can be manipulated, and what is BARC, right? Then Assam jails cannot be detention centers as per Guwahati High Court. So there was an appeal in the Guwahati High Court about the conditions of the detainees, the illegal foreigners who are being kept in detention centers which are basically inside the prisons. So the Guwahati High Court, it reiterated some of the observations of the Supreme Court which it had made in a similar case involving 37 Pakistani nationals, right? So what are those observations and what the court said and what directions it gave to the Assam government? We'll discuss that. Then a news about some green shoots in the economy. Q2 records 107% surge in fresh investments. So these total to about 2.19 lakh crore rupees, right? So we'll just quickly look at this. Then Ministry of External Affairs defends free press after Chinese note on Taiwan event. So the Chinese people are crazy. Earlier they were dictating terms to their own media. Then they were dictating terms to Nepalis and Pakistani media. Now they think that they can dictate terms to Indian media. So basically what is happening that Taiwan is celebrating its 109th National Day, and this is being covered by various media houses, WION Channel 2 in particular, right? So the Chinese embassy shot them off letters saying that do not address Taiwan as a separate nation. It is part of one China. So Chinese people and crazy actions. So we'll see, and then we'll see what the MEA says, and we'll also see what is India's stand regarding Taiwan and China. Then World Bank widens GDP contraction forecast to 9.6%. So earlier World Bank had forecasted it to be around 3.2%. Now it has revised it to 9.6% for India. So what are the reasons? And it has also made some observations about the actions taken by Government of India. It has applauded the actions. So we'll see that. Then American poet Louis Gluck wins Nobel Literature Prize. So we'll just get to know about her, some facts, nothing more here. Then we have covered 3 editorials, 2 from the Hindu and 1 from Indian Express. So should Indian startups take on global internet giants? So there are some very, very good points in this. This is basically a parley between 2 parties. So they have made some good points. So we'll get to know about the investment that the Indian startup ecosystem attracts, right? Then we'll also get to know what sort of per capita GDP is required in an economy to make digital services a viable business, right? The backdrop of this is Google versus Paytm, we already know, right? Then it tells us some unique points that what makes Google work, and then it also tells us about the unique Chinese model and how China helped its own startups to grow into big corporations. So we'll see all of those things. Then winning back trust in vaccines. So basically Trump was trying to push vaccines right before his election. That has not happened. And different countries are in a race to create a vaccine. That has created a trust deficit among the people, right? So this article basically talks about the American population, but this can be extrapolated to other countries as well, right? So it also tells us about the steps that FDA and the pharma companies have taken in America to restore the faith of public in vaccines. Then Bill of Exclusions. This talks about the ART, Assisted Reproductive Technology Bill, that has been tabled in the Lok Sabha by our Honorable Health Minister. So it gives an introduction about the aims of the bill, right? The bill is supposed to supplement the Surrogacy Regulation Bill. Then the author goes on to give some criticism of the bill, and she has rightly brought out some of the shortcomings. So we'll see that, and I'll also tell you what is ART, what is IVF, and what is artificial insemination, what are the different techniques, right? And for your convenience, I have also added timestamps in the description box. So if you want to skip to a particular news, just press that timestamp and you will scroll to that news, right? So this is all that we're going to discuss in this video. Now let's get started. Understanding the TRP. TRP stands for television rating point. Now you must be knowing that TRP is in the news for all the wrong reasons, right? So we won't get into that because that is not our domain. So what we'll do is we'll try to understand what is TRP. Now TRP tells about the ratings, or more importantly the viewer. how many people are viewing what channel and which socio-economic category, which age group do they belong to, right? Now, what is the importance? Using the TRP score, the advertisers, they put advertisements on different news channels or the TV channels, right? Now, this whole market is estimated to be around 78,000 crores as per reports, and some other reports peg that the advertisements based on TRP are in the range of 35,000 to 40,000 crore rupees. Now, if these TRPs are manipulated, then it is a very, very big scam. Not only it is a financial scam, but it is also cheating the consumers, the people who are watching the news, because they are being fooled at large. So let us see what comes out of this inquiry, because it is a political issue. That is why I'm not getting into it. So we'll understand what is TRP, what is its credibility, and how do we measure TRP in India. And the organization that is responsible for TRP in India is BARC, right? So let us quickly see. So what is TRP? It represents how many people from which socio-economic categories watched which channels for how much time during a particular period. Now this period could be a day, an hour, or even a week. Now, as to what constitutes a viewer, anybody of any age group who watches a particular channel for more than 1 minute is a viewer for the TRP ratings. Now, how do we measure the TRP ratings? So the agency BARC, it puts TRP boxes in households which are randomly selected, and they are selected on a criteria that they should represent the Indian population at large and different socio-economic categories, right? And about 40,000 households have these TRP boxes, right? And in each family member has a ID. So whenever he or she watches the television, first he presses the ID button and then he watches. And further, to avoid any scam or any manipulation, the content that is aired on these TRP specific TVs of those households, they have watermarks. Now those watermarks are audio files which are not audible to normal human ears, but if you have dedicated software and hardware, they are very, very easy to understand. So as per BARC, it is a foolproof method. But how can scam happen? Because the households where the boxes are installed, these boxes are installed by third parties. Now, sometimes the names of these households are leaked to different media houses, and then those media houses can manipulate them. Like for example, in the present scenario, certain news channel is accused of paying rupees 500 per household for watching that news channel, right? Now, what really is happening, we'll get to know when the whole investigation report comes out, because earlier the name of one media channel was being shadowed. Now it has also come out. So let us see how it all develops, right? So this period could be an hour, a day, or a week. Now India follows international standard of 1 minute. That is, anybody who watches more than 1 minute constitutes a viewer, and we make it public every week. Now what is the importance? Like I told you, the advertisers use the data to place advertisements. Anyone who watches television for more than a minute is a viewer. Their TRP is a metric by marketing advertising agencies to evaluate their viewership. It is the main currency for advertisers to decide which channel to advertise by calculating the cost per rating point. So they have this formula of cost per rating point, and based on that, they bid ads for different channels. As per FICCI and Ernst & Young report on India's media and entertainment industry last year, the size of the TV industry was estimated to be about 78,700 crores. And as per reports, about 70% of revenue of television channels comes from advertising and only 30% from subscription. So this forms a substantial amount of money. That is why it is very, very important. Number one, financial implications. Number two, the channels or the respected parties could be pushing their own narrative, their own agenda onto public, right? And that is also cheating the public. So it is pertinent that the inquiry should be taken up by a central agency and the truth should come out. Now, how is TRP calculated? Like I told you, they install barometers in over 45,000 empaneled households. These households are classified into 12 categories under new consumer classification system that the BARC gave in 2015. It is based on the education level of the main wage earner, ownership of the consumer durables from a list of 11 items ranging from electricity connection to a car. So, like I said, this sample should be representative of our socio-economic backgrounds. The panel chosen to capture TRPs must be representative of country's population and the methodology must be economically viable for the industry. Use of watermarks. Audio watermarks are embedded in video content prior to broadcast. These watermarks are not audible to human ear but can easily be detected and decoded using dedicated hardware and software. As viewing details are recorded by barometers, so are the watermarks. So this is how they detect viewer ID. While watching a show, members of the household register their presence by pressing their viewer ID button. Every person has a separate ID. I've told you all these things. Now every person is thus capturing the duration for which the channel was watched and by whom, and providing data on viewership habits across age and socioeconomic groups has a separate ID. So that is the importance, right? Now what is BARC? It is an industry body jointly owned by advertisers, ad agencies and broadcasting companies, and it is represented by the Indian Society for Advertisers, the Indian Broadcasting Foundation and Advertising Agencies Association of India. So it is a multi-stakeholder body. Though it was created in 2010, the INB notified the policy guidelines for television rating agencies in India on January 10, 2014 and registered BARC in July 2015 under these guidelines to carry out television ratings in India. So they are regulated by the government under these regulations and guidelines, right? Now what is their credibility? Now their credibility has been called in question in couple of times and throughout the years. So I am just giving you two examples here, but there are many more examples. So 2 years ago, INB ministry had raised concerns that BARC was underreporting viewership of Doordarshan, and that this is very true because Doordarshan is watched by so many people, and it was proved when the Mahabharata and Ramayana was aired and they got the highest ratings, right? So many people watch Doordarshan, especially the news channels, but they are underreported. And the INB ministry floated the idea of chip-based activity logs through all set-top boxes, but this was finally rejected because of inherent interest groups that were probably influencing this decision. In 2017, the editor of one of the top 5 English news channels had written to BARC about how a few households from Gujarat were contributing heavily to rival channels' overall viewership. So see, this is the irony that India is a country of 1.3 billion people, but only 45,000 houses, right? So if you manipulate a few houses and by paying pennies, you are able to manipulate these ratings and you can earn so much of revenue. So that is the whole scam. Now let us see what is the truth behind it. Of course, there would be some form of manipulation if that report has come out, but let us get into the depth of those reports and let us hope that the truth comes out. Assam jails cannot be detention centers according to Guwahati High Court. So in yesterday's video, I also told you about this problem in Assam and in Northeast, right? Yesterday we discussed about Gurkhas. They were demanding separate Gurkhaland state. So the Northeast has been home to influx from many outsiders, right? Foreigners who have come to the region throughout ages. Now, as per the local political parties and people, they have disturbed the demography and the economic balance of the region. So they want to push them out. So in Assam, there are some illegal immigrants. They are identified as foreigners and they are put in detention centers. Well, nothing wrong with it. But the problem is that these detention centers are placed inside the prison. So there was an appeal and the Guwahati High Court, it quoted the Supreme Court in a similar case which dealt with 37 Pakistani prisoners who were in detention in India, right? But then the Pakistani government, as we know, they are liars of the first degree. They refused to acknowledge their own citizens and they were pushed into jails. But then the Supreme Court made some observations. So the Guwahati High Court just reiterated what the Supreme Court had said. So let us see. The Guwahati High Court has said that people declared as foreigners cannot be kept in jails that serve as detention centers, depriving them of basic human rights and human dignity. The state government has been told to list steps taken to house declared foreigners outside jail, and if appropriate government land is not available, then they should hire some private agency or some private premises to put these people up, and hire any private premises if suitable government accommodations are not available for the purpose. Referring to an earlier Supreme Court judgment involving Pakistani prisoners, the court stated, Jails being used as detention centers were in conflict with the model manual for such centers. Detainees should be kept in an appropriate place with restricted movements, pending deportation or repatriation, and provided basic facilities such as electricity, water, hygiene, etc. So these are human rights issues. Lodged in 6 jails. So basically all the detainees are lodged in 6 jails. People declared as foreigners or illegal migrants in Assam are kept across detention centers within 6 jails where they share space with others serving time for various crimes. So this is the problem, because there might be some hardened criminals there, and the only crime of these foreigners or illegal migrants is that they have illegally entered India, right? So they cannot be equated with those hardened criminals. So they should be kept in a different place to honor their human dignity. As humans, they deserve some dignity. So that is what the court had said. Now let us see what the Assam government does about this. World Bank widens GDP contraction forecast to 9.6%. So if you remember, even yesterday we discussed World Bank's report and the statement that poverty rate has increased for the first time in the past 20 years, right? And the worst hit regions would be the Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So this again is talking about revision in the GDP estimates. Earlier, World Bank had said that India's GDP would shrink by just 3.2%, but now it is saying it would contract by 9.6% because of the problems arising out of the lockdown and loss of livelihoods and incomes. Now it further says that yes, there would be recovery in 2021-22 financial year on the assumption that all the lockdown restrictions that have been imposed would be fully removed, and because of a low base rate. I've already described what is low base rate. For example, a jump from 0 to 1 is a substantial jump, right? Then 1 to 2 again substantial jump, it is double. 2 to 3 lesser, right? 3 to 4 lesser. So this is what happens. So low base rate means that if your initial starting point is low, then any growth would seem high. So the growth rate would seem high, right? So it said because of low base phenomena, the growth would be higher, but only the growth rate. In absolute terms, growth would still be lower. It has also applauded the efforts taken by Government of India in terms of the financial steps that it has taken to counter the slowdown, but it has said that more and more needs to be done. And in future, if these things continue like that, then there could be a problem, because people would not be so upbeat about economy. Then the stock markets could also go down, because one of the curious facts about this whole lockdown has been that our stock markets have been doing well. And if you remember, we also discussed a news where the finance ministry, it basically sent memos to big companies, the financial companies, the financial institutions, that they had not raised the suspicious transaction STR report, right? Because the stocks were doing actually well. So more STRs should have been raised, but they were not raised. So that is another thing, but I'm just telling you because we are talking about economic growth, right? Now let us see what World Bank has said. As per the World Bank's South Asian Economic Forecast report, the World Bank expects India's economy to contract by 9.6% in 2021, revising its earlier estimate in June that output would shrink by 3.2%. The revision reflects the impact of national lockdown and income shock. Rebound in 2021, rebound to 5.4%. See, this is percentage. Like 1 to 2 is 100%, then 2 to 3 is less, about 66%, right? So the percentage would go down, but largely due to base effects, right? The low base, and hinging on assumptions that the pandemic related restrictions are completely lifted by 2022. Continue key reforms to reverse virus impact. Monetary policy has been deployed aggressively and financial resources have been channeled to public health and social protection. But additional counter-cyclic measures will be needed within a revised medium-term fiscal framework. Now this is just too technical. Just remember that government needs to do more. Policy interventions have preserved the normal functioning of financial markets thus far. However, demand slowdown could lead to rising loan delinquencies and risk aversion. So if this slowdown continues, then that could be a problem. So government has to come up with a way to ease the lockdown restrictions, save lives, and also help the economy to grow. Yes, it is a difficult task and it is a catch-22 situation, but this has to be done. Ministry of External Affairs defends free press after Chinese note on Taiwan event. So one more day and one more Chinese craziness. So now they think that they can ban media in their own country, well and good, but they think that they can also censor media in India. They have done so in Nepal and Pakistan and they have got away with it, but this is India, they don't understand it. These Chinese people are really crazy. So what happened? We all know that Taiwan, for all practical purposes, considers itself to be an independent country, and China and Taiwan have a very complex relationship. We also discuss how the Chinese jets have been intimidating Taiwan, crossing the midline in this channel, right? We discussed long before when the senior most US official in the past 4 decades visited Taiwan. So now what happened that Taiwan is celebrating its 109th National Day, and media houses in India are celebrating it and reporting about it, especially the news channel WION. Now, these Chinese people do not get along with WION. So, WION news channel, it placed advertisements in many newspapers, right? And other media outlets were also running articles and pieces on the Taiwanese National Day. And this is being organized by TECC. I'll just tell you what is TECC. Now, the Chinese embassy sent emails to more than 250 journalists telling them that they cannot report on this because China does not consider Taiwan to be a separate country. There is only one China in the world, right? So the Ministry of External Affairs stepped up and it said that the Indian media is free. It is not like Chinese media, and they report on issues that they deem fit on a basis of merit. For all the flaws that we may have in our media, but we are still far better than the Chinese media. We are not a state mouthpiece and our media is relatively free. Don't go by what these American or British channels or other media houses or the committees make reports, because those are all the vested interests. One day we'll discuss about that as well. So our media is fairly free, because in our country you can abuse the prime minister and get away with it. So that is the biggest example of our media being free. And in the same breath, you can also call names to the leader of opposition party and still you can go scot-free. Sometimes you can face police cases and all that. So let's not get into it. So MEA said that our media is free and China is nobody to tell us. Now India's official stand is that diplomatically we follow the one China policy, but it will or it might change soon because China is not sensitive to our needs and our territorial integrity. So we are also progressively going to change our policy and we'll be having more and more relations with Taiwan. So the Ministry of External Affairs reiterated that the Indian media is free and reports on issues on merit. The ministry's response came a day after Chinese embassy sent an email to around 250 journalists asking them not to refer to Taiwan as a country or a nation while covering a special event on October 10 organized by Taipei Economy and Cultural Center, TECC in India. So see, the Chinese are so insecure about themselves that they have to red flag everything. The note to the Indian media urged them to follow the One China principle with regard to the upcoming celebration of the 109th anniversary of National Day of Taiwan. The Chinese embassy reminded the Indian media that Beijing does not consider Taiwan as an independent country or a nation, and that Indian media should follow while reporting on Taiwanese events. So these people are crazy. They live in a world of their own. India's official position on Taiwan: India officially follows the One China principle and there has been no change in that stance. The TECC does not have diplomatic status here as India does not recognize Taiwan as a separate entity, but this is going to change soon, more so when India is going for the Quad, right? And Quad initiative is about inviting more and more people to join. So in future, maybe we'll see Taiwan joining Quad and then this whole issue would get more complex, right? But you just look at the Chinese, they are telling our media what to report. Should Indian startups take on global internet giants? So the background is Google versus Paytm. We have discussed that in 2-3 videos, the mini app store, right? Now this article, it tells some good points about certain things like the startup ecosystem in India in terms of the finance or the investment it attracts, right? Then it also tells us what makes Google work. Some little points, nothing heavy here, right? Then it tells us what kind of a per capita income an economy needs to make an internet company viable or an internet business viable in that country. right? Then it also tells us about the Chinese model of startups, how they have built global giants, right? It does not mention, but I'll tell you Huawei is a very good example of that, because Huawei has grown because of Chinese investments and the backing of the Chinese government. Now they have a bigger evil plan for that. One day we'll discuss about Huawei and everything. So these are the points that this article is trying to tell us. So we'll just look at those specific points. You don't need to get into their arguments. That is not required, right? So let us first look at the kind of investments that the Indian startup ecosystem is attracting. So it says that the India's startup ecosystem is still in its first innings. In the fourth quarter of 2019, 34.2 billion of venture capital going into the US market. As compared to that, India only had 6 billion, and that was a record for us, right? And in the first quarter of 2020, we had only $2 billion. So in terms of the venture capitalists are those who invest in startups, right? So less number of venture capitalists and less quantum of venture capitalist fund is coming to India. Why? Because we don't have the infrastructure that is required to build and scale nimble startups, at least not yet. So we need to work on that. India doesn't have large infrastructure players that can help set up stuff. Everybody in the Indian startups ecosystem knows that we are not there yet. Then again, a very pertinent point that India has zero strength in hardware, and this is true. We are a software giant, but we have zero strength in hardware. We have practically no real manufacturing or chip making. But this could all change if you remember the PLI scheme, under which we recently saw how Government of India has cleared 16 companies, and the total potential of that scheme is about $163 billion. We discussed that scheme. So that scheme is about mobile phone makers and the electronic component makers. So that could give a fillip to this real manufacturing and chip making, right? Now, this tells us why does Google work? Some little points. There is an element of trust that Google's invested in building up. Its products are user-friendly, true. It has also spent a lot of time expanding the market by localizing its product. And this is very, very pertinent because you get Google in Hindi and many Google services in regional languages as well, right? So it has localized its products. So from that point of view, Google has been invested in Indian market. Now it talks about the 30% and he says that this is way too much. And why? Because the startups also have to advertise via Google to reach their customer base. In effect, 30% already Google is cutting and they pay more to Google for advertisement. A large chunk of all the money that these companies make goes to Google and Facebook, true. Now the challenge is that India as a market itself is poor. Now he's talking about that what sort of a per capita income is required in an economy to make any digital service viable and profitable, right? So the challenge is that India as a market itself is poor in the sense that it doesn't have enough spending capacity for digital services to take off and be profitable and viable. One of the thumb rules that several companies talk about is that GDP per capita should be above $4,000. Now we are hovering around $2,000, so almost half of it. For example, in markets like Indonesia, where the GDP per capita recently touched 4,000, companies have also been growing profitably and faster. India is still at about $2,000 to $2,500. So here your potential to monetize this user is very low, and it is very true. Monetization of digital business in India is tough. In fact, the big companies like Myntra, Jabong, they haven't even made profit yet. They were thinking of making profit in 2020, but now we've seen what has happened in 2020. So that is the scenario. And all the big companies, they're just trying to see who ends up staying in Indian market for longer. And it is going to be Amazon in the end and Flipkart, because they have changed our user habits, because now it has been a de facto thing in India. If you want to search anything, just go to Amazon, right? And Amazon is also delivering in Leh Ladakh. They don't get any revenue from that. In fact, that is a losing proposition for them, but it is to play with the psyche of consumer that we deliver at every point and every place in India. So what will happen in the end? We all would be buying from Amazon. Amazon would be the monopoly, and then it will make its profit. So that is the model every e-commerce business in India is basically following. Now, if you end up spending a ton of money on distribution and on your commissions to Google and others, you end up with practically nothing. That's the challenge that entrepreneurs have been flagging. This is also true. Now, he says that startup companies, they create value by being innovative, and that is their USP. But bigger companies like Google and Facebook create shareholder value by building barriers that startups cannot afford to create. If you remember, we discussed an article in yesterday's video how the US Congressional Committee has red flagged these four big companies, Apple, Google, Amazon, and how they are misusing their dominant market position and how they acquire startups. And I also told you that WhatsApp and Instagram, they were all startups and they have been acquired by Facebook, right? So every company that grows and that could be a potential challenge is acquired by these startups, and they create barriers and hurdles. They have much larger tools in their arsenal to be able to create barriers. One of the tools they use is to buy all competition to ensure that they stay in the market and create shareholder value. Now, companies like Google or Amazon also do not operate like foreign entity when they are in India. They are heavily invested in our market. So we cannot have a policy that is too much reactive policy against them, because it would send out a wrong signal and others would not come into India. So it's a slippery slope. This person is saying that if we become too nationalistic about products that are built for the internet, because internet is global, it has no boundaries, then we will create a very strict policy environment which encourages only local Indian innovation and tries to stay off foreign competition. So on paper it sounds very good, but in the long run it could also do damage to Indian industry. But then again, we have the example of China, how it created mammoths, social media mammoths, and companies like Alibaba, Tencent, because they banned these external companies, Facebook, Twitter, everything they banned. They have their own Weibo, they have their own big multinationals because precisely they banned it. So I do not agree with their opinion. So that is why I just don't get into these editorials. This person is saying that we could get subpar products, but another thing is, following the Chinese example, we could be making mammoths in India. An ultimate truth is, this is also true, lot of Indian companies are also funded by Chinese or US investors, the venture capitalists, right? Now he talks about the Chinese example, how they help companies grow. We could probably take example of what the government of China does. Specific technologies and companies that develop these technologies are chosen, and then there is unwavering support from the government. The government does it in multiple ways, such as giving domestic startups favorable access to the market, giving them an opportunity to grow and to stabilize their offering. So government fully backs these companies and they become mammoths. This is a conscious strategy to develop giants that can compete on global scale. And they're doing the same things in Olympics as well and in other fields. So very, very important, right? We should also try to emulate that. Now he also makes a very good point that if Indian companies are trying to compete with Google in say 5 years, or they want to get to where Google is today in 5 years, but they are ignoring that Google in 5 years would also be growing. So we need to think 10 years in advance, because if we want to go up to Google's level, then we'd have to double up what we are doing. You cannot compete with what Google is today, because it may take us, let's say, 5 years to be where Google is now. And in 5 years, Google would have moved away from what it is today. So to be able to compete with Google, we will have to be where Google is going to be 5 years from now. That requires significant time to plan and execute our strategies. So this is all about this editorial that you need to know. Some good points, right? So that is how you go about the editorials. You don't have to read the whole editorial line to line, only some specific points and sections that are of relevance. Bill of exclusion. Now this editorial is from the Indian Express, and this is about the Assisted Reproductive Technology Bill that has been tabled by the Honorable Union Health Minister. So this bill is to supplement the Surrogacy Regulation Bill, right? Now this person, she makes some good points about the shortcomings of the bill. So this is a criticism of the bill, but the points are good. And there is no ideology, nothing, some very logical and legible points. That is why I have included this editorial here, right? We'll also take a quick look at what is ART. Basically, ART means that when you are not able to conceive naturally, then you take help of technology, biotechnology or medical technology to conceive. And there are basically two prime methods of that. One is artificial insemination and other is IVF. So we'll have a quick look at them as well. Nothing too technical about them, right? So first let us see what she is saying. This article gives us an introduction that the Assisted Reproductive Regulation Bill was tabled in the Lok Sabha. It aims to regulate ART banks and clinics, allow safe and ethical practice of ART and protect women and children from exploitation. So these are the aims. The bill was introduced to supplement the Surrogacy Regulation Bill 2019. That is also to be passed because it is under consideration by 2 parliamentary committees. Now this ART bill took 15 years in the making and it fails to respond, as per this author, fails to respond to the needs of 27 million infertile Indian couples. So she has criticized this on certain points. First I will tell you the points and then we'll get into the nitty-gritties. First she says who can access the ART. So this is discriminatory. She says that violates Article 14 and categories like single women or heterosexual couple who are not married or the people belonging to LGBTQI, they cannot have access to ART. On the other hand, foreigners are able to get access to ART, right? So this is discriminatory. Then she goes on to tell us how this bill does little to protect egg donor. Because ART is an invasive procedure, it involves taking out the egg from the donor, the mother, egg is taken out. Now that is a risky procedure. It could also endanger her life, but it does not give her the protection, neither does it give her any sort of counseling or any support. Then she talks about that this could also lead to threat of eugenics. Now eugenics is about manipulating genes, kind of like creating genetically modified beings, not exactly, but kind of. So the bill has provisions that before transferring any embryo or gamete, it would be checked for any genetical disorder, and if there is a disorder, then that would be donated for research purposes. So she says that this is not ethical. Then she goes on to tell us that there are many inconsistencies between the ART and SRB. Now ART is supposed to supplement this SRB, but there are many inconsistencies between these two. So we'll look at them. Then she also tells us that there is poor wording on sale, transfer and use of gametes, and this could use to potential misuse and even black marketing of these. And then finally she tells us that the bill calls for one-sided grievance committees that should be formed by the ART clinics, but she says that instead there should be ethics committees, right? And that is also a legible point. So now let us get into the nitty-gritties. So point 1, who can assess ART? Married heterosexual couple, a woman above the age of marriage to use ARTs. Exclude single men, cohabiting heterosexual couples and LGBTQI individuals and couples from accessing ARTs. This violates Article 14 of the Constitution, that is the right to privacy of jurisprudence of Puttaswamy, where Supreme Court held that sanctity of marriage, the liberty of procreation and the choice of family life and the dignity of being concerned all individuals irrespective of their social status. So in short, she is saying that it is not only violating Article 14 of the Constitution but also the Puttaswamy judgment. Then there was also a Navtej Johar judgment in which Justice Chandrachud exhorted the state to take positive steps for equal protection of same-sex couples, but this bill discriminates against them. Now why are single men not given? Because there are chances that there could be cases of sexual abuse in the future. So that is why single men are removed from the ambit of the people who can access it, right? Now again she tells us that there is no prohibition on foreign citizens accessing ARTs. Foreigners can access ART but not Indian citizens in loving relationships. Again, this is wrong. This is an illogical result which fails to reflect the true spirit of the Constitution. Then she tells us the next point that the ART does not do what it says on the label. It does little to protect the egg donor. Harvesting of eggs, invasive process, if performed incorrectly can result in death. Bill requires an ex-donor written consent but does not provide for her counseling or ability to withdraw her consent before or during the procedure. She receives no compensation or reimbursement of expenses or for loss of salary, time and effort. So this is also wrong because this talks about altruistic. Failing to pay for bodily service constitutes unfree labor, which is prohibited by Article 23 of the Constitution. So it is kind of like bonded labor as per this author. The commissioning parties need only to obtain insurance policy in her name for medical complications or death. No amount or duration is specified. The egg donor's interests are subordinated in a bill proposed in her name. The bill restricts egg donation to a married woman with a child at least 3 years old. So, who can donate egg? A married woman with a child at least 3 years old. Even here, egg donation as an altruistic act, that means no money could be charged, is possible only once a woman has fulfilled her duties to the patriarchal institution of marriage. Now, children from the ART do not have the right to know their parentage. This is to protect their own rights. The bill requires pre-implementation genetic testing, and where the embryo suffers from pre-existing heritable, life-threatening or genetic diseases, it can be donated for research with the commissioning party's permission. These disorders need specification or the bill risks promoting an impermissible program for eugenics. Now, talking about the inconsistencies between ART and the SRB. Although the bill and SRB regulate ARTs and surrogacy respectively, there is considerable overlap between the two sectors. Yet the bills do not work in tandem. Core ART processes are left undefined. Several of these are defined in SRB but not the bill. Definitions of commissioning couple, infertility ART clinics and banks need to be synchronized between the bills. True. A single woman cannot commission surrogacy but can access ART. So this is bizarre. The bill designates surrogacy boards under the SRB to function as advisory bodies for ART, which is desirable. However, both bills set up multiple bodies for registration, which will result in duplication or worse, lack of regulation. So this happens when there are multiple bodies to overlook one particular function, then it always results in lack of regulation. For example, surrogacy clinic is not required to report surrogacy to National Registry. Now this is very, very wrong. Also, the same offending behavior under both bills are punishable differently. Punishments under the SRB are greater. Offences under the bill are bailable but not under the SRB. Finally, records have to be maintained for 10 years under the bill for ART but for 25 years under the SRB. So many inconsistencies between the two. The same actions taken by a surrogacy clinic and ART clinic likely to be the same entity attract varied regulation. Again a problem. Now the bill's prohibition on the sale, transfer or use of gametes and embryos is poorly worded and will confuse foreign and domestic parents relying on donated gametes. The bill requires clinics and banks to maintain a grievance cell, but these will be one-sided. Clinics must instead have ethics committees. Mandated counseling services should be independent of the clinic, right? The SRB and the bill impose high sentences, 8 to 12 years and hefty fines. So this is all that you know from this editorial. Please take a screenshot so that you have your ready-made note. Good analysis and good criticism of the bill. Now this is ART. So basically why this problem is occurring, because of lifestyle changes. People are getting married later. They're eating junk food left, right and center. They're not taking care of their bodies. They're living stress lives, right? So this is all taking a toll on their fertility. Also, we have been using our mobile phones and other technology. So we are more exposed to radiations. That is also playing havoc to our fertility cycles, right? So more and more, you'd be surprised to know many people are suffering from problem of infertility in this modern era, right? With its growing use, ART has helped millions of infertile couples around the world to achieve pregnancy when all the other options have failed. Who is it for? ART might be an option for women who cannot conceive naturally, cannot carry pregnancy to term, have genetic disorders, have partners with abnormal sperm. Now types, there are two main types of ART, artificial insemination and in vitro fertilization. These are the success rates. Just take a screenshot, don't have to get. Risk. Although generally safe, ART procedures carry extra risks, multiple gestations, preterm birth, then emotional distress, right? Now this is IVF. So what happens in IVF? You take a egg cell, you take a sperm cell, you fuse them in a petri dish, then you let it grow to a particular stage and then you reimplant it into the mother, right? So IVF is the most effective type of ART, helping more than 60,000 women achieving pregnancy every year. So there are types, there are 8 possible types of IVF depending on source and condition of ovarian, eggs and sperm. Now these are all the probabilities. You can take a screenshot. There's nothing to explain here. Procedure: IVF occurs in 5 steps: ovarian stimulation, then egg retrieval, sperm retrieval, fertilization, and then embryo transfer. So it is again transferred back to the mother's womb. Success rate, again, don't have to get into that. Cost, you don't want to know. Then artificial insemination. It is safe, effective, and economical method of helping couples with infertility problems achieve pregnancy. Now the types, there are where the sperms are placed determines the type of AI. So you don't have to take out the egg in this. You just place the sperm artificially. So these are the sites 1, 2, 3 and 4. So these are the names: intrauterine insemination, intracervical insemination, intratubal insemination, and intravaginal insemination. Please, you need to prepare yourself for these topics because these are the futuristic topics and you can expect questions from these topics in your mains for UPSC. Intrauterine insemination, IUI, is the most common and effective type. First, the sperm are washed to select the best ones, then they are placed in the uterus. So this is the intrauterine. This is the most commonly followed. Now its cost is less. Again, we don't need to get the cost. So ART, 2 main types: IVF and AI. IVF has 8 types and AI has 4 types, right? So this is all about the ART, and we also discussed the ART bill and its shortcomings, right? Now, winning back trust in vaccines. So this is about the US. Trump was trying to push for a vaccine, but that push has created a sort of a trust vacuum among people from taking the vaccines. So pharma companies and FDA, they have taken some steps to promote some sort of trust among people and to go for trust building with the people. So let us look at those points quickly. Winning back trust in vaccines. The FDA and pharma companies are taking steps to address concern about COVID-19 vaccines. So the FDA came up with a guidance for emergency use authorization for vaccines to prevent COVID-19. The FDA has made it clear that data from phase 3 studies should include a median follow-up duration of at least 2 months after the completion of full vaccination regime to help provide adequate information to access the vaccine's benefit risk profile. So even after phase 3 trials are conducted, you have to wait for at least 2 months to make a vaccine, right? So they have put a pause. So Trump was trying to bring out a vaccine before his election. So that is not going to happen. And he was trying to promise to the people that as soon as he's elected, he would bring out a vaccine. That also is not going to happen. Shutting the door. With at least 2 months of follow-up data likely to become available at the earliest only by November or December, the guidance essentially shuts the door on vaccine manufacturers making their vaccines available for public use through the emergency use authorization route before election day. So that is not going to happen. The FDA guidance comes after the White House had blocked its release due to concerns that guidelines would delay the arrival of first dose until after election day. So this is all political. Now, the unprecedented speed at which COVID-19 vaccines have progressed to phase 3 trials and the haste shown by Trump administration to get a vaccine out before election day have eroded public trust in COVID-19 vaccines that are undergoing trials. A Gallup COVID-19 tracking survey carried out in the US between July 20 and August 2 found that 35% of Americans did not want to be vaccinated even if an approved vaccine was available at no cost. True, because Chinese are trying to come up with a vaccine, but I personally would not take it even if it is available for free. And even if it is the only option, I would wait for at least a year before I take a Chinese vaccine, right? Similarly, CNN polls found that the percentage of people willing to be vaccinated dropped from 66% in May to 51% in October. People unwilling to be vaccinated include those who are otherwise inclined towards vaccines. So this haste has eroded the trust. Now, building the trust. The FDA's initiative to build public trust in COVID-19 vaccines is one of the many steps taken by stakeholders to address the concerns about new vaccines developed and tested at speeds unknown before. In September, 9 vaccine manufacturers came together to sign a joint pledge to assure the public that they would develop and test COVID vaccines in accordance with high ethical standards and sound scientific principles, and always keep the safety and well-being of vaccinated individuals the top priority. So they would not jump the gun and they would not rush the vaccine, because if you try to do that, then you would be playing with the safety of the people. They clarified that they would not seek premature approval from regulatory authorities. And in an unprecedented move, three pharma companies, Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca, it is conducting phase 3 trials in India, right? Published the phase 3 trial protocols to inform the public and scientists about the evidence companies will use to determine if vaccines are effective. And our health ministry has said 50% efficacy, right? Because it is a respiratory vaccine. Had it been some other vaccine, they would have gone for 100%. But for India, any vaccine to be accepted, it has to be at least be 50% effective or have at least 50% efficacy. Finally, in an open letter to colleagues, Pfizer's Dr. Borla said he can't predict exactly when or even if our vaccine will be approved by the FDA, and that the world will be safer if we stop talking about vaccine delivery in political terms. So this is all about this editorial. This is basically about the politics and how the different stakeholders, including pharma companies and FDA, are trying to build confidence in people for taking the vaccine once it finally becomes available. American poet Louis Gluck wins Nobel Literature Prize. So nothing to discuss here, just factual information. American poet Louis Gluck won the 2020 Nobel Literature Prize. Now there is something surprising about this choice or this award because her themes of childhood and family life, and she draws inspiration from myths and classical motifs. Now she is the fourth woman to win the Nobel Literature Prize in past decade after, these are the names, Olga Tokarczuk, Svetlana Alexievich and Alice Munro, and only the 16th since the Nobel Prize were first awarded in 1901. So this is all about this news. Only the name Louise Gluck, she's a poet, and the distinctive thing is that she uses themes of childhood and family life and draws inspiration from myth and classical motifs. Another short news about the green shoots economy. Q2 records 107% surge in fresh investments. So the fresh investment proposals surged sharply in the second quarter of this year, rising 107% over the first quarter, with 2,290 new projects entailing an investment of 2.19 lakh crore. So nothing more to discuss here. This is a figure, you can take a screenshot. Just keep in mind that fresh investments are coming in. So folks, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel if you like our videos. And also please press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. And please give us a thumbs up if you like our video. Also, please connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.